So for those of you who may not know, we'll sing a little song. It's called Jai Radha Madhava. It's by Bhaktivinoda Thakur. He's one of the great acharyas in our line, one of the great teachers in our line. So this song is about Krishna and Balaram in Vrindavan. It's about Krishna's activities in his hometown. So if you know the words, you're welcome to sing along as usual. Otherwise, you can just listen. What? Yeah, I think it's probably okay now, I think. Everybody here okay? You can hear me? Okay. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopijana Vallabha Girivanadari Yashoda Nandana Brajajana Ranjana Yashoda Nandana Brajajana Ranjana Yamuna Tira Vanachari Yamuna Tira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to Sri Guru and Sri Gauranga. So today we'll be reading from a book. It's called Srimad Bhagavatam. Sometimes called the Encyclopedia of Spiritual Knowledge. It's quite a large book. This isn't the only book. It takes up a small bookshelf. The whole thing. This is the first section of 12 in the book. Yeah, it's a nice book. So we'll be reading from the second chapter of this book. We're going to be pretty close to the beginning, practically before the book even starts. But there's some actually very nice verses in the beginning. So this verse, just to give a little context, there's a bunch of sages that are gathered to hear this Bhagavatam, to hear this spiritual knowledge. And they are gathered before this person, this other sage. He's named Sutta Goswami. So Sutta Goswami, he's just barely getting into the subject matter of the Bhagavatam, and he's kind of giving some general outlines here to the sages here gathered. So this is chapter 2 of the book, and I'll read the Sanskrit, and then we'll go into the translation, the English translation, the purport by our Guru Srila Prabhupada. So I'll read the Sanskrit here. Actually, before I do that, it's customary we offer our respects to the personality of Godhead, Krishna, before we begin reading this book. So we'll chant the traditional prayer. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So, text 10. Kamasya nendriya pritir labo jiveta yavata jivasya tattva jigyasa narto yashchaya karma bhi. So, the translation. Life's desires should never be directed towards sense gratification. One should desire only a healthy life or self-preservation, since a human being is meant for inquiry about the absolute truth. Nothing else should be the goal of one's works. So I'll read Srila Prabhupada's purport here. The completely bewildered material civilization is wrongly directed towards the fulfillment of desires in sense gratification. In such civilization and all spheres of life, the ultimate end is sense gratification. In politics, social service, altruism, philanthropy, and ultimately in religion or even in salvation, the very same tint of sense gratification is ever increasingly prominent. In the political field, the leaders of men fight with one another to fulfill their personal sense gratification. The voters adore the so-called leaders only when they promise sense gratification. As soon as the voters are dissatisfied in their own sense satisfaction, they dethrone the leaders. The leaders must always disappoint the voters by not satisfying their senses. The same is applicable in all other fields. No one is serious about the problems of life. Even those who are on the path of salvation desire to become one with the absolute truth and desire to commit spiritual suicide for sense gratification. But the Bhagavatam says that one should not live for sense gratification. One should satisfy the senses only in so much as required for self-preservation and not for sense gratification. Because the body is made of senses, which also require a certain amount of satisfaction, there are regulative directions for the satisfaction of such senses. Excuse me. But the senses are not meant for unrestricted enjoyment. For example, marriage or the combination of a man with a woman is necessary for progeny, but it is not meant for sense enjoyment. In the absence of voluntary restraint, there is propaganda for family planning, but foolish men do not know that family planning is automatically executed as soon as there is search after the absolute truth. Seekers of the absolute truth are never allured by unnecessary engagements and sense gratification, because the serious students seeking the absolute truth are always overwhelmed with the work of researching the truth. In every sphere of life, therefore, the ultimate end must be seeking after the absolute truth, and that sort of engagement will make one happy, because he will be less engaged in varieties of sense gratification. And what the absolute truth is explained as follows, as the text goes on. So I'm going to take a minute to offer my prayers to my spiritual master and Srila Prabhupada, so I may say something that's beneficial for everybody here and for myself. Om Jnanantamandasya Yaranjana Shalakaya Chakshurmitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. I was born in the darkness of ignorance, and my spiritual master is opening my eyes up with the torchlight of knowledge. I offer my humble obeisances unto him and all members of Sri Parampara, the disciplic succession, the succession of gurus. So this is a very interesting verse, actually, this verse here. I'll read it again. Life's desires should never be directed towards sense gratification. One should desire only a healthy life or self-preservation, since a human being is meant for inquiry about the absolute truth. Nothing else should be the goal of one's works. So this verse actually is quite interesting because it really sets the bar. It kind of lays out the basis for how everyone should live their lives. It's a very important verse like that, and it comes right at the beginning of this book, right at the beginning of Bhagavatam. It forms the framework for how this book should be understood. So, right at the beginning of this explanation of this verse, Srila Prabhupada, he explains that this verse is actually, this verse is proposing a very different mode of life than the modern civilization proposes, that people are pursuing in the modern civilization. Because we see that most people in this world, they are directed towards, their activities are directed towards sense gratification. Now, for some of you, that may be an unfamiliar term. Some of us, we are familiar with it, but this term sense gratification means to satisfy our physical senses, like my eyes, my ears, my nose, my tongue, all these physical senses. And not only these physical senses, like we can kind of understand, okay, we need food for the tongue, we need, we like to see nice things, we like to hear nice things. It's some sense gratification, it's pretty obvious. But also there's a subtle sense gratification, which means something that's very much pleasing to my mind or pleasing to my intellect, like it's like doing puzzles, it's not like the body is very much engaged in doing a Sudoku or something, but the mind is engaged. It brings some sort of a mental satisfaction. So everyone in this modern civilization is chasing after this in different ways. But actually what this verse is saying, what the Bhagavatam is saying, what the sage Sutta Goswami is saying actually, is that this sense gratification, this should not be the goal of our life. Actually, these senses, they should be only satisfied as much as necessary to kind of maintain equilibrium, to maintain a certain level of keeping the body together, healthy, like that. And that actually the goal of one's works, the goal of one's life, should be actually inquiry into the absolute truth, inquiry into the important questions in life. So this is actually this is kind of the core of most, in one sense, most a bona fide religious movement, is that the focus is really on learning about God, learning about why we're here in this universe, learning why things are the way they are, learning about the truth. So this very much kind of turns modern civilization on its head. So this is kind of a lofty goal, though, because naturally, at least speaking for myself, even though I'm trying to be a spiritual practitioner, that these senses are always demanding some sort of satisfaction. It's not that, it's like when you're hungry. It's like when you're hungry, you can't just tell the body, okay, don't eat. It'll keep nagging you. It's like a child who wants a toy or something. It doesn't. You can't just say no toy. Child's just persistent. So similarly, these senses, they are very persistent. Sometimes the urges, they're sometimes referred to as like pushings. The senses, they're pushing us to do things. So this idea of living a life that's basically just meant for inquiring into the absolute truth, it's a little bit of a lofty goal to come to. Actually, it's a little bit of a difficult process. But actually, we can come to this point gradually. It's explained a few verses back in text number 7 of this chapter. That by rendering service unto the Supreme Personality Godhead, Sri Krishna, one immediately acquires causeless knowledge and detachment from the world. So the idea explained here is that actually by engaging in devotional service, by engaging in chanting Hare Krishna, by trying to engage in these spiritual processes, then one actually one actually gains detachment from these material things. One becomes less concerned. One automatically becomes less concerned with the activities of the body and the needs of the body. They don't become as much of a priority in life. And it's described that this comes about actually through Krishna helping. That by actually this process, by coming in contact with the absolute truth, by coming in contact with Krishna, we become purified. We become more spiritualized. Coming at that same point from a different angle, if we want to give something up, we have some sort of bad habit, maybe, anyways, maybe that's not the best example. So we have some sort of bad habit. We can quit the bad habit, that's good, but also it really needs to be replaced with something, actually. And actually that, replacing it with something else, that's what really is going to keep that going. It's like if a child is misbehaving, you may put them on a timeout, but you have to actually, in order to give the child something to do, you actually have to give him some sort of different engagement, something better to do. Maybe the child is, playing somewhere dangerous, so you have to give him somewhere where he can play safe, because naturally the child is going to play. So in the Bhagavad Gita, one of our other main books, very compact spiritual knowledge, this one, it's the unabridged dictionary, Bhagavad Gita, a little smaller. So in the Bhagavad Gita, in chapter 2, text number 59, there's an explanation of this, actually. So I'll read the text here, because it'll explain it a little nicer, and I can explain verbatim. Okay. So here, Krishna is explaining. Here he says, the embodied soul may be restricted from sense enjoyment, though the taste for sense objects remains. But ceasing such engagements by experiencing a higher taste, he is fixed in consciousness. So the idea here is we all want to be happy. And generally speaking, the way we learn to be happy is growing up as children, is we learn to be, there is some sort of happiness that comes from gratifying the senses. I eat my food and I'm happy, my belly's full and I'm content. I get to go to see the sunset. It's very pretty. My mind is satisfied. There's different things that are satisfying for the senses. So we are trained to think that, this is happiness. But actually, if one practices these spiritual processes like chanting Hare Krishna, seeing the deity, all these things, there is actually kind of superior enjoyment there. There's something that's a little better than what we've experienced before. And actually this is one of the keys, actually, to really becoming detached from the material platform, becoming kind of attached to doing these spiritual things. This one actually gains a sort of special happiness by doing these spiritual activities. So it's not that the spiritual practitioner is someone who, as this verse might lead one to believe, that he lives a life of abnegation. He lives a life of just very austere conditions, and sometimes you see these yogis, they're standing on one foot for a while, or their bodies are very skinny, and they've taken all these kinds of difficulties to try to pursue some sort of spiritual path. But actually, the path of Bhakti Yoga, the path in Krishna consciousness, is actually meant to be one of increasing enjoyment. Maybe some difficulties along the way, but actually is meant that when we experience this higher taste, then actually we'll experience ever increasing happiness. So this is actually explained a little bit in this purport here, where it's explained that the sincere students of this practice, they are always overwhelmed with the research of the truth. So people who have gotten a taste for this spiritual practice, they can't get enough of it. Actually, they are always engaged in study or chanting or distributing the knowledge to others. They can't get enough of it. Actually, this is a healthy sign. One of my, when I was living in the temple here for some years, our temple president, he had his name was, now he's taken sannyas, he's known as Bhaktiananda Tirtha. I think he's in Croatia now. But sometimes in the temple, one has a lot of things one wants to do, and not just in the temple, but so many places. One has a lot of things to do, but only a small amount of time, right? And there's a saying, there's not enough time in the day, right? Everyone knows that. Everyone knows that saying. And what he was saying actually about this, well, this is actually a healthy condition. Sometimes people, they may be frustrated by this, that, I have so many things I want to do and I don't have time to do them. But actually what he was saying, this is actually a very healthy thing. That this shows we want to do something. We're enthused. We have enthusiasm. We want to do this. We want to do that. We want to do this. But we only have so much time. We only have so much resources. If we feel like we have enough time, if we're just content, it means we aren't maybe so enthusiastic. Sometimes people in a class, maybe in this class, they're watching the clock. Maybe this class is too much time. Maybe maybe whatever has too much time. But actually, someone who's very enthusiastic about their practice, they think they don't have enough time. So here Srila Prabhupada is explaining that these sincere students, they don't feel like they have enough. They are always overwhelmed in the study of the Absolute Truth. They're always busy. So this is actually a very healthy sign. So if one actually becomes absorbed, if one really develops a taste of this spiritual life, he can't get enough of it. This is actually this is experience that everyone's kind of looking for. Everyone wants to develop this this focus. They say of being in the zone. Actually to be totally absorbed in something and to be totally happy in that. And this is actually what is promised by this spiritual practice. It's explained here in this same chapter, in the text number 6, is that here it's I'll read the verse. It says, the supreme occupation, dharma, for all humanity, is that by which men can attain to the loving devotional service unto the transcendent Lord. Such devotional service must be unmotivated and uninterrupted to completely satisfy the self. So there's kind of two important words there that say unmotivated and uninterrupted. So this is actually a very high level to come to, because the reason, as Bhagavatam states, that we aren't always happy, that we aren't always satisfied, is that we are kind of going back and forth. Is we spend some time thinking about the Absolute Truth, thinking about God, thinking about the meaning of life. We spend some time pursuing that. But then we go back to our old ways. We're interested in, okay, how am I going to get this? How am I going to get that? How am I going to make this arrangement so my senses can be happy? And we become engrossed in that. And then we, in that consciousness, we are moved by the dualities of happiness and sadness, of, you might say, love and hate, of, heat and cold, of all these things. We are very much absorbed in the dualities of this. We get what we want, we're happy. We get what we don't want, we're unhappy. But what this whole verse is saying is that one should only make these kinds of arrangements. One should only be materially absorbed, you might say, as little as possible to maintain body and soul together. As little as possible to live the life that we are comfortable with. And it's a gradual process. Like even the monks here at the temple, I guess they live a pretty simple life, but there's definitely still some arrangements that are made here so they can live comfortably. So they don't get rained on, so they're warm at night. So there's some basic arrangements that need to be made, but one should not become so absorbed in those that one actually forgets the purpose of one's life, of inquiry on the Absolute Truth, and that should be the kind of end goal for one's work. In one sense, actually, spiritual practitioners can be a little confusing, because the way they live externally can be very much the same as someone who is not pursuing spiritual life, aside from maybe the chanting or their religious rituals. But the way they're living is many things, but is actually very much the same, but the goal is different. So someone might be having their house, having their children, all that, and they're doing the same things. They're working their job, or they're going here, they're going there. But one person's goal is actually in the activities, kind of in the end result of the activities themselves. He thinks, oh, I'll get money, and then I'll enjoy by eating, or I'll enjoy by going here, I'll enjoy by going there. Whereas the spiritual practitioner, he may be doing actually very similar things. He's going here, getting money, he's got to eat, he's got to do this, got to do that. But actually the whole framework is actually supporting his inquiry in the absolute truth, supporting his or her spiritual quest. So it's just kind of the backbone of what he's doing. So I'll kind of summarize a little bit here. So the kind of goal, the position we should be at the end in our life, ideally, is that we should be acting in such a way in this world that we're just taking the minimal necessities as required, what we minimally need for self-preservation, and as it's stated here, a healthy life. Because really our life is meant for inquiry about the absolute truth, and sometimes we can get distracted by these other things. And in order to achieve that platform, in order to actually get there, we have to take to this process of devotional service. We have to take to this process of chanting Hare Krishna, taking prasadam, seeing the deity, hearing the scriptures, seeing these things. Because by doing these things, this decreases our kind of attachment for all these material things. It decreases our absorption on the material platform, on the kind of bodily platform. And then the end result of all this, the end result, like kind of where we're actually, how our activities will be at the end of all this, is that we become very much absorbed in actually this spiritual practice. That we wake up every morning, we think about this. We go to bed every night, we think about this. We eat, sleep, and we eat. We live and breathe actually a spiritual life. This is the end result of the practice, and we can see actually that some of the people who have been doing this for so many years, that's what they're actually on that platform. I can think of, I guess, came from India, and I see these people, and they're very absorbed in that platform. It's actually very inspiring for me that actually someone can be so fixated on something. And not only that, it's not that they're just fixed on it, but it's not dry. They're actually very much happy doing it. So this is the promise of Krishna consciousness. It's an eternal, joyful engagement. So I'll take some questions now, if anyone has any questions or comments. The floor is open. Do we have another mic? Okay, Jamal has the mic. So if anyone would like to ask any questions, we'll pass the mic around to you. Okay. Jamal, over here. Oh, over here with Daksha. Alright, sorry, I'm forgetting your initiated name. Dhanavari, or? Yeah. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Thank you, Prabhuji. So I have two questions. One is, I'm confused. I read that over the body, mind is superior, and over the mind, intelligence is superior.
Yeah.
Over the intelligence, soul is superior,
yeah.
and then super soul is superior eventually.
Yeah.
But in some slok, I've read that the senses are strong, very strong, and they can, in second chapter, it says
Yeah.
senses can carry you away, and it can pull like a horses, and then you make a wrong decision or whatever. So would you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I could talk about that a little bit.
And then second question is, you just mentioned, Prabhuji, that you went to India, and I would like to know what you said it inspired you. I want to know where you went and what place did it more inspire you in a spiritual way. So
okay, so I'll comment a little bit on those.
Thanks.
So So the first thing is in the Bhagavad Gita, as she was explaining, it's stated there's kind of a little bit of hierarchy, that you have kind of the senses, and then above that is the mind. The mind's said to sometimes be the sixth sense, or it's kind of the master of the senses. It's controlling the senses. Then above that is the intelligence, and above that is stated to be the soul, and you might say above that is the super soul, or kind of, you might say God within our heart, the supreme director. But also sometimes it's stated that the senses can apparently take a superior role. That the senses, they become top dog all of a sudden, even though they're at the bottom of the chain. So really what this is that these senses are like kind of they're kind of like somebody who's like a bad influence, you might say. So it's like we might have so many intelligent people. It's like you might have a group of people, that are quite intelligent, but someone out, might have someone a little less intelligent there, and because they're very vocal, because they convince everybody else, they convince the intelligent people to do the wrong thing, So similarly, even though we may be, anyways, it's a common thing, like overeating, We know, okay, I shouldn't eat this much. Everybody kind of knows. You can make mistakes sometimes, but generally speaking, we kind of know our general capacity for eating. But then the tongue says, the body is like, oh, just a few more, And the intelligence is like, okay, why not? Maybe it'll work this time. Intelligence kind of just takes a hike, So that's kind of how it works. And actually, this is not an easy process to reverse, because we are so eager to derive happiness that we can ignore the intelligence for the promise of some immediate happiness. But we learn we can learn through hearing, either spiritual books and also just kind of common sense knowledge. Someone tell you, hey, I know that's not going to be good for you if you eat that much. That's common sense knowledge. But also on the spiritual platform, we learn, actually, the idea is you learn from hearing, is that, okay, if you go down this path, it's not going to lead to a good place. If you go down this way, so you should go this way. So by hearing, one strengthens the intelligence, and the senses can be in their subservient position. Otherwise, they can tend to overwhelm us. So that's one comment on that. Hope that addresses that. And I was quite a few places in India, but actually, I was thinking of one particular devotee and of a group of devotees over in Mayapur. I spent a few months in Mayapur studying what's known as Bhakti Shastri, which is a kind of a 3.5 month course which focuses on Bhagavad Gita and a few other books, and it's kind of an in-depth study of them. And there's also kind of there's even further studies to that. One's called Bhakti Vaibhav, which goes into this book in a few sections of it. And there was one devotee there. He's a sannyasi, so he's a renunciate. He's an older gentleman, I think 40s, 50s. And he's taking this course as well. He's taking this course kind of a level above me. And I saw how busy he was with it. My workload is like this, but his workload is 2 or 3 times mine, And I could see how busy with it, how engaged he is. And actually he likes it. He was telling me how enthusiastic. He's saying it's hard work, but he's saying how much it enthuses him. So that's kind of inspiring for me, that I can see someone be so absorbed in the scripture, someone so absorbed in actually hearing about these things. So that's it really kind of shows me where I want to go in one sense. It shows me that I want to become a little more interested and absorbed in these things. So that's one thing that inspired me, among other things. Thank you. Anyone else? Any comments or questions? We have time, so don't be shy. Okay, over here. Okay, Mike's coming.
I am wondering, why do you have such unique haircut?
Oh, why do I have such unique haircut? Well, it's not so unique if you look around, actually. It's not My friend Jamal is similar haircut in some ways. And
You were wondering the same thing about him, right, Hasya?
I don't know. Yeah, ours is similar. I just got the little tail on the back, you know. So, quickly, the idea is that kind of on a practical level, keeping your head shaved, it's clean, it's easier to manage. Another thing is that for monks, which I'm not actually, but generally for monks, this keeping the hair short is kind of a sign of renunciation. It's a sign of keeping things simple. So in one sense, as a Hare Krishna, as a male Hare Krishna, that the keeping of hair is a kind of sign of worldly renunciation to some extent. Even in Prabhupada's time, many of the people who were married, they still had shaved heads. It was just kind of a symbol of decreased worldliness, you might say. And then the little hair in the back, it's kind of part of the tradition that kind of separates us from other spiritual groups. Other spiritual groups, they may have the head completely bald, or they may have a little bigger one, or they may do certain knots or whatever, just like this front mark here that's unique to us. Some other ones, they have like lines or 3 lines or different things, and it separates us from them. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, anyone else? Any questions or comments? Okay.
My question is about the 9 devotional services, the 9 different types
Yeah.
of devotional services, and if that some are more valuable than others, or more important, or more beneficial.
Yeah. See, maybe Balaram can help me out with a little bit, because I don't want to quote wrong. But I believe Lord Chaitanya, he said basically the most important process is actually chanting. But I can't. He says it. Lord Chaitanya says it a little more nicely. Do you have anything you could say on that, Balaram? Do you ever anything? But the idea also with chanting is that hearing is included in it, because when you chant, most of the time, unless you've got earplugs in, you hear. You want to say something?
I mean, there's that verse from the Chaitanya Charitamrita, the Nitya Siddha Krishna Prema Saddhikavanoy Shavanara Shuddha Chitte Kore Doy. It's Bengali, but the English is that that Krishna consciousness is eternally established in the hearts of all living entities, and by the process of hearing and chanting about Krishna, not about some politician, as Prabhupada would say sometimes, one's love for Krishna awakens. So that's, and of course there's that verse from the one ancient Vedic scripture, the Harinama. It's a main process for this age.
Yeah.
But one can become perfect by the other processes as well.
Yeah.
But obviously, Srila Prabhupada stress hearing and chanting. So.
Yeah. Okay. Any other comments or questions? Still have time. Anyone likes to? Okay. Thank you all for listening and being attentive. Oh, you have something, Balaram?
Yeah, I have a question.
Okay.
So yeah, a lot of the times people may think, oh, well, it makes a lot of sense, Krishna consciousness, or at least it makes some sense, and they may feel attracted to it. But what about like this idea of actually developing faith in it? Because in order to actually stay with it, one has to have faith in it, that it actually works and it's something I should be doing. So maybe you could comment on that idea of development of faith.
I could comment. I'll see if I can approach this in some ways, because someone actually asked me this recently. Said, what keeps you going? That's what he said. Yeah. And for me, it's the philosophy. Like, it kind of philosophically, it makes, that's one of the things that makes a lot of sense to me. And this actually comes from the hearing process. That philosophically, we have to be convinced about that what these books are saying is actually true and practical and something that we can actually achieve. And what I was explaining to him, and what I explained to many people, is that some of these things in these books, they're quite lofty and they're quite far out, actually. Especially for someone who's initially taking up the process. But in the beginning, we should focus on the things that are actually can be observed, that we can actually see in our lives, so we can see some effect. I was telling him about the Bhagavad Gita. It describes what's called the 3 modes of nature: goodness, passion, ignorance, and how someone in these modes acts, and what they're like, what kind of food they like, how they work, all these things. And actually, if you look at the Bhagavad Gita, you read that section, and you actually analyze the world, you can see that. You can see that practically, actually. And also, kind of on another level of seeing things, things you can experience, is that generally people, if there's some attraction to Krishna consciousness, that means there's something they actually like about it. And it's usually, it's not just it's some kind of direct experience, like the kirtan. Sometimes people they get some happiness out of it, So that's a big attractor. Even they might not like the philosophy. Usually they like the kirtan, maybe not. Who knows? There's everybody out there, but then maybe they like the food. So there's something special about that. So that in one sense is a little bit of a beginning of faith. It's like, I don't know what these guys, I'm not so much into what these guys are talking about, but at least they sure know how to cook. So something they're doing right. So they have some little initial faith there. But faith is achieved by hearing, and also importantly by associating with devotees, because just like they have these, all these weight loss commercials, right? And you see the person. So Jenny or Fred, he lost 20 pounds, and it shows him with his pants, and he's got he's lost 6 pant sizes or whatever, So, in order to be convinced devotional service is going to make us happy, or that there's some truth in it, we need to see people that are actually doing that. If everyone here had just taken to devotional service yesterday, maybe there'd be a little less inspiration. But we can actually see people that have been doing this 20 years or 5 years or 10 years or 40 years, and there's some sort of effect there. Then they're different than everybody else. And this actually gives you faith. Just like you see these people, they do this program and actually go figure they had some results. So we see people who have the results, we see people who actually, and we hang out with people that are actually interested in talking about Krishna, then we become interested in actually pursuing that path. I don't know what the verse Sanjayate Kama is. Yeah. So the idea is by association one develops the desire. So if we associate people who have faith, then we'll also have faith. It's kind of an interesting thing. Yeah. Any other questions, comments? Okay. Do you want to? We have a mic.
You've increased my faith, Hasyagramy.
Oh, okay. That's good. Okay. The mic's coming.
Well, you talk about the senses, how we must not give up to it, according to the Sridham Bhagavatam.
Yeah.
But one thing apparently in Krishna consciousness movement, all those higher worlds are mentioned, like Vaikuntha, Loka, and others, who apparently even there people enjoy senses, no?
Yeah.
So maybe you can elaborate a little bit about that?
Yeah, that's an interesting point. So I'll repeat a little bit here, just so everybody can hear. Is that what he's saying? Is that according to this verse, that we should not focus too much on gratifying our senses, but you see in the spiritual world, like what's Krishna doing? Like you see, like there's a whole song about Krishna's lunch. You know, it's more things than anyone could ever imagine eating. You know, so what's going on there? You know, so the idea is actually that the spiritual practitioner on the on that level, someone who's in the spiritual world, they are actually only interested in Krishna's satisfaction. They're not interested in their own senses really. But it's kind of a funny thing because actually Krishna himself, kind of in a somewhat bewildering way, like Krishna, he's interested in the devotee sense gratification, in their happiness. And generally, how do people kind of exchange dealings of love? You know, I was talking to someone over in Mayapur, and they were saying like generally one of the two most common ways people express their love for each other is cooking and flower arrangements. You know, pretty common thing. You buy the wife flowers, buy the girlfriend flowers, or cook. You know, take them out to dinner, whatever. You know, this is a very common thing. It's easy to understand. So the same sort of thing is going on in the spiritual world. That these, you might say, the senses, they're kind of a means, a vehicle for expressing this love. But actually, the devotees themselves, the people up there, they're not really interested in having all this nice food or whatever. I mean, they're still having a good time. Don't get me wrong. They're having a good time having all this nice stuff. But actually, they're really more interested in Krishna having this nice stuff. But Krishna, at the same time, he wants his devotees to actually have all this nice stuff. But the tricky thing is on the neophyte platform, on kind of the lower platform, kind of this engaging these senses, it's very much a distraction from it can be very much a distraction from our spiritual life, because we're trying to make money, we're trying to do this, we're trying to do that, and the whole emphasis is on increasing kind of the things my senses can take in, and thinking that'll make me happy. But on the you might say on the elevated platform, one might be actually taking some of those same things. And I might be eating the same foods or whatever, but that's not the core of his life. You know, that's just kind of to maintain the body. Maybe the foods are nice, but actually, what he really gets happy off of is actually hearing and chanting about Krishna. Like there's an example in the Chaitanya Charitamrita of this devotee. His name was Pundarik Vidyanidhi, and externally he was appearing like what's the word I'm looking for? It's slipping my mind. Anyway, so he was appearing like very much like kind of sense gratifier number one. The word starts with an H. Anyways, it's not going to me. What? Yeah, like hedonist number one. You know, he's like there, and he's got like, he's like eating grapes or whatever. What's the stereotypical thing? You know, he's like eating grapes or whatever, and he's like sitting on a throne. He's got all these servants or whatever, and it looks like actually one of the devotees saw him, and he's like, "What is this? Like I thought this person's supposed to be an exalted spiritual personality, you know." And then one of the other devotees who was with him, he started reciting some of the verses from scripture, recited some verses about Krishna. And this devotee, Pundarik Vidyanidhi, he became so overwhelmed with happiness that it's described that there's kind of very high symptoms a devotee can experience sometimes on these transcendental levels of happiness, which can cause certain changes of the body, like the hairs can stand on end, you might shake or whatever, you might start crying, just like, something very scary happens, your hairs stand on end, something very intense, like maybe you're at a wedding or something, your hairs might stand on end. So in a similar way, he starts experiencing all this Pundarik Vidyanidhi, he starts experiencing all these symptoms, and he actually has a little fit, and he starts wrecking all his stuff. And this devotee could see that actually all this kind of external stuff, it really wasn't important to this person. It was almost kind of actually a covering for who he really was, to kind of keep out kind of outsiders from misunderstanding. So actually, the spiritual practitioner, his real satisfaction is in hearing and chanting about Krishna, even though, sometimes there may be, you might say, some external sense gratification going on, but that's not really that's not his aim in life. He's not so much concerned with it. Does that help a little bit? Okay, so we're pretty much at time. If anyone has one last question, they can say it, but otherwise we're pretty much at time here. Okay, thank you all very much for listening. We'll have kirtan now. Hare Krishna.